Okay, welcome again, everybody. This is scheduled as another hour and a half session, but I'll try and push on and do that in much quicker time. However, I think there's 99 PowerPoint slides in this one, so it's going to be good. But most of them are just screenshots. What I'm going to do, or first of all, before I do that, I mentioned before the Open Learn Research Report this morning. If anybody wants a copy of it, there's one here to take away at the end. But this afternoon, what I was going to do is try to put in perspective the global OER movement. There's a lot of talk about it, what's happening. So I want to try and give you a flavour about the national, international developments which are happening, which, to my mind, seem to suggest that this is a movement that is there, not going to go away. It will be sustained, although exactly in what form and in what nature it finally evolves into is yet to be seen. But this is different from other movements and developments. So first off, let's go back to something similar to what I covered this morning. OER involves lots of groups and organisations around the world. They've been explicitly funded by foundations, governments, NGOs, institutions, and through donations. And they can be found, as I said before, in funded institution repositories, funded, non-funded, community-based initiatives, proprietary channels, websites, and they're being supported via international and national consortia, commercial activities and organisations, infrastructure activities and organisations. Mainly there is enormous diversity out there. There's lots of things being done, a lot of people doing it, and we're really at the early stages of all this. As I say, despite the movement having going for nearly 10 years now, we're still in terms of being like the dot-com bubble. Lots of things happening, and there is a big bubble happening, and things is going to, probably will burst, but there will still be things that retained after it. There'll still be some developments and activities which carry on and develop out of all this frenzy at the moment. Here in the UK, we've got the GISC programme. This is dealing with the UK OER Phase 1 programme, but you'll see there's the recently started UK OER 2 programme. I'm not going to sort of detail all these things, but there is a whole set of institutional, subject-based and individual projects in Phase 1, and there's similar sort of diverse range of projects in Phase 2. Phase 1 represented 4.7 million, was it, of investment, and this Phase 2 is something like another 3 million. There's quite a bit of money that is going into sort of pump priming these activities. As I said this morning, a lot of that is about getting it sustained, whether it's through GISC supported activities or the Higher Education Academy supported activities, and they're both sort of involved in monitoring these different resources. I'm not going to go through all the details. You can find the websites and look at that. So here in the UK in particular, and certainly within England, there is an awful lot happening, an awful lot of institutions beginning to publish material and do things around open educational resources. But I mentioned this morning that David Wiley as being the father or grandfather of the OER movement. Well, the sugar daddy, or sugar mummy, whoever you want to look at it, is the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. They alone have now devoted over $100 million worth of grant funding to OER projects in the past 10 years. So in terms of the sort of funding that's gone in here in foundations, they have been first and foremost in this, although they won't continue to do it for much longer. They will carry on doing it at the moment, but then they'll move on as a foundation. They see themselves as social entrepreneurs. They'll invest in areas to see how it goes, but they're not going to invest in them forever. They invest in new developments which they think might last and have traction. One of the things they have part funded, but this is more community-based, is Connections. I mentioned it previously. As you'll see, there are many institutional-based repositories. This is a repository, it comes out of Rice University in Houston in Texas, in the US. And so it's got institutional backing, but it was set up in a way whereby anybody could create and develop and share resources in it. So it was a site for the development and creation of resources, a bit like we have tried to do with the lab space of Open Learn. So it's very much like that. And so although some of the faculty from Rice have also developed materials and put in there, a lot more of the stuff in there is come from a much wider community and at all levels, not just at our education level. But in terms of support, of course, they've got to find monies. They've got some monies, say, from foundations, but they're also trying to create this idea of movement. There's a Connections Consortium. Institutions pay to be members of that, and through that they're trying to foster a sort of broader and wider sort of community of interest and involvement around and support around their website to try and, it's their way of trying to make this a key development and as a community-led and something owned by the community, if not managed by others. Equally, there's Wiki Educator I mentioned this morning. So Wiki Educator has been set up using, obviously, Wikimedia technology to do that, but it's nothing to do with Wikipedia and all those things. It's not one of their developments, but it's using the Wiki technology, again, to develop OERs for that purpose. And equally, it says there, can help donate now or join the Open Education Resources Foundation, because behind that, they're trying to get the monies to support their activities through this foundation. And there's different types of contributing members. You can be a platinum member if you're willing to cough up $10,000 to $25,000 per year. No, there's a whole set of different things like that. So here's where the people are trying to have, okay, it's a shared resource and a way in which you're trying to get that community involvement and not a single institutional backing, but get different types of institutions, different types of people involved, some paying their way into it and some being unpaid volunteers, a bit like on the sort of Wikipedia model. Other people involved in trying to push this is UNESCO. UNESCO have been putting a lot of activity in over about, it is almost 10 years now, around open educational resources. They've, as well as hosting the meeting in 2002, which came up with and promoted the term open education resources for the movement and gave us the sort of main definition for this, they have also run over a number of years a series of online conferences and seminars and discussion groups, which has led to the development of whole sets of community resources, a toolkit, some publications, a lot of other material which is here on, again, it's another wiki-based website, but it's UNESCO OER community. If you just Google that, you'll come up to it. And there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And it's involved, say, people from all around the world in these discussions. They've been sort of synthesising this. So a lot of the ideas of what the barriers and understanding of what's happening in different countries can come through these types of activities. The Commonwealth of Learning, for those of us who belong to the Commonwealth, is supported by Commonwealth governments to also support open and distance learning through Commonwealth countries, through sort of a whole set of activities and bilateral work. And some of that is around open education resources. One example here is the Virtual University of the Small States of the Commonwealth. It's a thing where they talk about small states of the Commonwealth. It's a small population. Doesn't mean it's a small in geographical size, because you get somewhere like Botswana is a member, and Botswana is a large place, but there's only about 2 million people there, so it's a small state. But these small states don't have the size and infrastructure to do a lot of these things and collaborate on producing educational content themselves, so they're trying to collaborate across those different countries to produce content, common curriculum, which they can all use and develop. So this example, Commonwealth of Learning are also supporting a lot of these international conferences and discussions and building on the work and working with UNESCO on that. Here's another outfit, OER Commons. They're quite good. They're almost like they're not a repository in themselves, they're more a referatory. You can take the line in terms of they take RSS feeds from a lot of other OER repositories and sources so that you can find an awful lot of open education resources worldwide through this, a lot of different levels, different subjects. They sort of also pull together lots of information about open education resources. So this, again, is another site where you can go and find out quite a lot of what is happening worldwide. It is a bit US dominated in some ways, but it does pick up a lot of things from around the world. And then you get national developments like this, the Japanese Open Courseware Consortium. So this is many of the leading universities in Japan, and I think it is 2006, launched the Japanese Open Courseware Consortium to try and provide mutual support and help in actually producing open courseware in various ways. And you've got something like this, the Chinese Open Resources, I can't remember what the course stands for now, Chinese Open Resources in Education, I think. So this is, you might think that the American flag doesn't look like China. It's actually the person who runs this is Fan Dun-Weng, who's a Chinese national, but actually works at the Boulder School of Mines in Colorado. And that's where that is. But he's actually taken a lot of materials from MIT OpenCourseware and elsewhere and got them translated into Chinese so that they're available for those who read and speak Chinese. So it's again trying to be a national thing. MIT OpenCourseware, of course, is the one that really sort of kicked this off, as I said. It's an institutional repository, and they've got all their material there. There's about 2,000, it says 1,800 courses, about the 2,000 courses that there are put on by MIT in total. So not every professor has got their course up there, but it's almost complete, and obviously there's a lot of things there and they're doing there. They launched in 2001. They've got the Open Courseware Consortium, a badge there, of which I was a board member for 2 years, is having its global meeting in Boston, Massachusetts this May, and it's marking 10 years since the announcement by MIT of their OpenCourseware initiative. So it is really sort of marking that sort of 10-year period. Here's another example of a national development, national funded project, WikiWise in the Netherlands, and this is about providing materials which are really it's not so much for the direct university sector, but it's what might be called the polytechnics or college sector, and the interface between high school and the college sector and things like that, and very vocational. But it involves the Open University in the Netherlands, but a number of other of these hogeschool and so it's a consortium of development of producing resources for a range of people, but it's a different funded. Here's Universia. Universia happen to be a member of the Open Courseware Consortium, but Universia is funded by the Santander Bank, Banco de Santander, and Universia is primarily provides links between Spanish and Portuguese universities, obviously in countries in which Banco Santander is present, because it's where Banco Santander is present, although most of it is for Spanish and Portuguese-speaking countries. There are members of UK universities, including the Open University, who are members of the sort of Banco Santander Universities network, because Banco Santander is here in the UK. But there's a part of Universia which deals with open courseware, and they've published a lot of material in Spanish and Portuguese, not just in Peninsula Iberia, but in Latin and South America and things. So there's a lot of stuff there. Now, this is just highlighting that on the face of it, much of open education resources produced so far are in English, but it's not to say that there is not increasing amounts of material in other languages, and that is growing all the day. And when you get support like this, you can obviously get a lot of developments in, say, sort of Spanish and Portuguese, where you've got some support and funding behind it. Other ways of doing this, obviously, open education resources are seen as being a potential boom for developing countries or emerging countries. Here in Africa, we've got OER Africa. They are seen as an enabler and facilitator. They don't produce any open education resources themselves. What they do is help put people together. They put universities together, both in Africa and with universities elsewhere around the world, to try and solve particular needs of particular universities that there might be, including ones here in the UK. Again, but this is a different model of trying to promote the open educational resources, and it's across countries, all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It works wherever people feel a need and whether institutions wish to approach them. But they act as a brokerage body to do this, and also an advocate in terms of advocating to those universities that open education resources can be a very important part of their strategic development. And having visited some of them, been in South Africa this time last year at the launch of the University of Cape Town's OER repository, being at a meeting where there are many universities from South Africa present, all of them are taking this very seriously, that open education resources can offer quite a bit for their own development. So it's just, again, they do have links to particular projects here, one on maths, planning and pilot and things like that. And but generally they're trying to just meet the needs of the people who come to them rather than push their own things. Of course, they're funded, some things are trying to be totally communitarian and sort of just involve volunteer efforts. Here's the peer-to-peer university. It's only got about 6 courses in it, I think, at the moment, but this is totally volunteer-based in doing these things that people volunteer, putting together the materials, to tutor the courses and things like that. So you can actually, it's not just an OER, you can actually study a course and be taken through it with a tutor, but everybody's giving of their time. So this shows something of the range, but of course this is very international. You can start thinking, and this is something the OU is involved in, the open education resources and open access resources go in all sorts of different ways. I talked about that before. Here's an example of iSpot. It's part of the Open Air Laboratories project funded by the Big Lottery Fund. And here at the OU, the iSpot is a place for sort of community and social contribution to the effort. So although some of this might not be seen as directly as OER, it's a model of how perhaps things could be done differently, because in this case it's about biodiversity and identifying wildlife. So people here in the UK can upload a photograph they take of something they see, and they say, I think this is a X, and there are other people from expert groups and societies who are able to come in and say, no, it's not that, it's one of these, and this is the reasons for. And so it's a way in which people both post sightings and things like that. They learn through, they post things, they say what it is, others come in and correct them. They can start learning how to identify wildlife better. And there are different reputation ranking mechanisms in here, such that you can start off as a novice, and after a few years you might be one of those experts helping some of the others. But I just pointed out is it's something different. It's open access resources rather than OER, but it's something that might sort of start drifting into the educational field more directly, although this is partly educational and learning. It's just different nature to it. Sorry, nature to it. There is actually an OU course called Neighbourhood Nature you can take if you want to be involved, but you don't have to do that at all. Of course, proprietary channels, already mentioned that there's a lot of stuff now through iTunes U, leading universities going out through that, including the Open University, as YouTube Edu, equally people putting things out there. There are different obviously characteristics and affordances to putting stuff out through iTunes U, help people download and interact with it, as opposed to YouTube. And that's one of these things about these different channels. And of course, if you're publishing open educational resources, you don't have to just publish them in your own repository. You can publish them in all sorts of places if the license allows it. And you can put it in YouTube as well. And obviously other people can do that to your material. We've had people download material from Open Learn and post it elsewhere, perhaps in YouTube, perhaps in their own blog or other places. It's the sort of thing happens. This is sort of viral nature of both the content as well as the things. It's not just that people come to your website and find it. People might find your content where you least expect it, because somebody else has been distributing and putting it around, or they've taken it and modified it, and so people see the modification and they track back and find where it came from. It's the many ways in which these things sort of come together. Now, that's a very rapid run through of a whole sets of projects and activities that are sort of happening worldwide to show that there's a lot going on in this area. I just want to look in a little bit more detail about two things. The Open Courseware Consortium as a sort of global body trying to sort of bring people together around open educational resources, and one of the first consortia to get started, and also the sort of TESA project as a different way of conceptualising how open educational resources are used and developed collaboratively across institutions. So quickly, the Open Courseware movement. Well, what's Open Courseware to open educational resources? Well, this tries to explain how Open Courseware fits into the OER movement. That you can think about open content in general, all those open access resources. It could be any image on Flickr, it could be any bit of music on openly licensed on iTunes or whatever. You've got open education resources, that's stuff, we said it's been developed for educational purposes. Open Courseware is a part of that, because the key feature is that the materials are organised as courses. So not, as we were discussing this morning, it's not a little bit of assets. The stuff is organised, presented as though it's the materials around a course, a structured set. There is some structure, some pedagogy to it. It's not just a list of assets and say, here's a whole series of videos or things to do what they want. And these are the types of things they'd normally include, but it's not exclusive. I mean, the definition of a course is quite broad in this sense, but as I say, it's more structured in that way. I mean, for most institutions with open courseware, as with MIT Open Courseware, it is these types of things. It is the lecture notes, syllabi, course calendar, and sort of projects and things which have been devised by the lecturer, by the professor, and are provided to the students, whether it's through a VLE or not. But the sort of study units we're a member of the Open Courseware Consortium here at the OU, and the study units, though, of course, there are more highly integrated, pedagogically structured set of materials developed for self-study. But there are study units. They are still fit within the definition of being a course that's here. But they're openly licensed, as you expect. This is an interesting point, which is I've been made this morning. They're a reflection of the education provided by the sponsoring institution from the authoring instructor. I think it's quite necessary to sort of think about this when you're putting out stuff, is that it is a visible entity of what happens at your institution or what you do in your practice. So it is a reflection of that. So you need to think about that as to whether you're doing it in the way you want to do it. It says institutions are the decision makers for their contributions, so projects can be quite different. These things, it's not a distance learning initiative, no degrees granted, but it is a collection of material and are there for repurposing, modifications, welcome. And certainly MIT Courseware has travelled a lot and has been translated. I showed you the Chinese things, but there's also many Spanish, Portuguese. They've had stuff translated, masses of it translated into about 20 different languages so far, and just growing, that type of thing. So even just a simple translation makes it available to many more people. But how it started, well, for MIT, they posed two questions. How is the internet going to change education. What is MIT going to do about it? So they did all those things. This was about the turn of the century, of course. And so they're looking at dot-com things. Can we make money out of this? But they decided to go with their mission, which comes back to what I talked about, to advance knowledge in ways that best serve the nation and the world. And so they decided, rather than try and put on distance learning courses and charge for them and try and make money out of them, that they get more value for them, for their mission, to make stuff openly available. And they believe, and as part of the consortium, believes that if we all participate in this, then it's to our own common good, our common wealth. So for the Open Courseware movement, the value is meeting the organisation's desire to contribute to this, showcasing the organisation. Again, some of the things I talked about for the OU as the reasons for doing this. Creating a repository where people can have their work seen, faculty and researchers. Again, it comes back to this thing, it's not just the teaching side of it, you can think about the research angle to this that can be important. Presenting potential funding agencies with attractive and useful opportunities as well. So it's the openness is inviting people to come and collaborate and contribute as well. So there are all these other things. I'm not going to go through them all in detail. You can see many of the things that are in the handout. But providing an entree to a worldwide community of dedicated educators, again, I think that's important. It's about this moving into a different area. So that's the sort of movement generally, and you could say it's the Open Courseware movement. You could equally say that for the OER movement, disparate and diverse though it is. But in the consortium itself, it's to sort of promote those activities. Who we are, well, there's nearly I think it's nearly 200 members now. This thing is a little bit dated, about 12 months ago, 100 live OCW sites, and nearly, I think it's probably up to nearly 10,000 courses now. This is just some of the institutions, as well as the OUs, University of Oxford, here from the UK and Nottingham. In terms of otherwise, we've got the Korean Open Courseware Consortium. There's Universia over there, I mentioned. There's OER Africa. It's Creative Commons themselves, TU Delft. There are many, many more, and there's more joining all the time in terms of doing that. And this just shows something of the growth up until October 2009, and it's continued. And if you go onto their website, you can find out where all those members are, where they are around the world. But of course, equally at the moment, the consortium is being bankrolled by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and so just like Connections, it also has a membership structure in which people pay to be members. And again, this is try to provide, if not a fully funded, but a way of providing some ways to meet some of the costs of running the consortium, but also runs other events. We've got institutional members, affiliate members, associates and corporate members, because with corporate members it also takes in private companies. Kaplan University is a private outfit, is also a member of the consortium. But it tries to promote benefits, as all the foundations and consortia do, from these different things, about collaborating with others, consulting with others, collective visibility through international exposure. And it's about being part of a common movement and being able to get at the conferences, forums, webinars, newsletters, toolkits, all these things, whereas that, again, it's that people working together trying to provide common or general solutions to common problems, or bespoke solutions to common problems in different ways, but using the expertise that there is amongst the membership. And there are many ways in which you can get involved in terms of working groups and people to do that. And obviously your site is linked on the Open Courseware Consortium site, and because it's a site that a lot of people go to as well, we're finding in Open Learn to get a reasonable amount of traffic coming through from that means, because in terms of traffic coming to any website you set up, it can come in different ways. So people just find it through search engines, but you get a lot of referring sites. If you belong to these type of people and get mentioned on them, then you've got those people referring. If a lot of people are coming to there, then you get some of that traffic coming to you as well. They might be interested in it. So you're sharing your exposure and e-visibility as well via these cross-links between members and consortia. There's a lot about sharing best practices, resource sharing. The idea of resource sharing, this one coming back to we talked about this morning, of trying to reduce the sort of lifetime costs of doing this. There's significant costs in everybody trying to reinvent the wheel. There's significant costs, and I know UK OER projects find that in terms of everybody dealing separately with the same publishers for third-party materials. And they say, can't we get together and do sort of deals? I mean, there has been some movement, for instance, where MIT were able to negotiate a deal with themselves with Elsevier in terms of use of material from Elsevier publications. But of course, once they've got something that they've used openly available on their site, then it's available to everybody. So, in terms of working with publishers, but it might be that a consortium could now try to broker deals on behalf of the community with educational publishers to get access to certain materials from educational publishers and make it wider, and then it doesn't require every institution to write in and ask Elsevier, can I please use this and do that. It's a sort of joint effort. Oh, I forgot about it. There's also looking at it in the European perspective. I've been involved in a number of European-wide projects now through what's called the European Association of Distance Teaching Universities. It says on the tin it's mostly distance teaching universities, but not necessarily all. Some of the projects do involve other institutions, more conventional campus-based universities as well. And so in terms of looking at open educational resources from a European perspective, it needs to sort of fit into aspects of globalisation, and these are sort of the things which are driving a lot of people. That generally, a lot of reports show that the more people, proportion of people in a country that go through higher education, generally the higher the GDP for that country. There's a virtuous circle that the higher the educational attainment levels within the population, the higher the GDP and generally the economic status of that country. So trying to provide for a much better educated workforce at all levels is important. You hear this all the time. The reason governments go on about it is because there's lots of evidence to show that it is important. And they try to do that. But see, in Europe, we've got issues of an ageing workforce, possibly more inflexible workforce. Probably need to do things like that. How can open education resources play any part in that? In Europe, we've got this thing called the Lisbon Agenda, complete the internal European market, actions on knowledge and innovation, investment in research and development, facilitate innovation, ICT and sustainable resources, investment in human capital through education and skills. Now, you might often think, a lot of people are thinking, well, there's a lot of rhetoric going on here, and it's European Commission or the European the presidents are going on about these things, but it does shape a lot of funding, a lot of activities, and this does get translated down into national policies and activities, particularly in the European higher education area. There are 46 countries, not just within the European community, within the European higher education area, who are trying to harmonise and standardise a lot of the things around higher education and do these things. And so there's great value in trying to see how it can improve participation in formal and informal education. Some of the things we talked about this morning, formal learning, participant rates have generally risen, but there's big differences. Some are at higher levels of participation than others, but even if you look at participation in the non-formal and sort of job-related, still significant variations. And these are the types of things that need to be addressed. And institutions, and both at national policy but of the individual institutions, need to sort of look at that and say, oh, this is something that we can do, other programs that we can do, put on, that help meet some of those needs. Are there ways we can increase and widen participation? and what does it mean to participate or engage in higher education? Is it always being present at a university doing a degree qualification? Or can it be done through other means? Is participation in the informal study or the study of higher education resources in a work-based setting, non-formal, is that still engaging in higher education? And there's a lot of issues. But at the end, you can talk about the semantics of the principles of this, but it's what the practices do. Does the practices improve the educational well-being of the general wider workforce and community? And now we've got sort of restructuring through the European higher education area, the Bologna process. There's a lot talked about the mobility for all learners, mobility between informal and formal learning, open education resources for better access to high quality knowledge for all, and then mobility through their working lives. So it's more about not just initial education that people might get post-secondary education, but it's lifelong learning in the different ways. And how can open educational resources, how can e-learning, how can open and distance learning, how can all these things, what contribution can they make to that? Answers on a postcard, please, because they're still working on that, although a lot of things are happening. And EADTU, as I say, we're members of the courseware consortium themselves, but there are a number of projects here. OER HE, I'm currently working on leading a work package on widening participation through open educational resources, more things. So again, this is at a European level, there's things happening on researching, developing, evaluating OERs. Here's the OER HE sort of website. Here's a previous project called Moral, multilingual open resources for independent learning. These are all research and evaluation projects, but they're sort of continuing work. Again, this is all about just this exploration. I'm not saying we've got all the answers yet, but it feels like that there's some value in this, and a lot of people are taking up what works and what doesn't work. Here's another EADTU project, LECH-E, which actually happens to be led from the Open University, but this is where members of the EADTU are collaborating on the development of materials on climate change or sustainable development at master's level. So here's a real example of saying collaborative development of educational resources, which will be, when they finish them, be published as open educational resources. And it's that issue of can we do something together, which then means that those resources can be used by all the partners, but also by other people. It's a collective effort to try and produce things. So trying to learn what are the pros and cons, the pitfalls, the opportunities that trying to do that collaborative development in sort of curriculum development. And here's TESA, Teacher Education Sub-Saharan Africa, which is yet another example I've already mentioned. I'll quickly talk about it again. It covers across, I think it's 9, I think it might now be up to 18 institutions across 9 different countries using 4 or is it 5 different languages for the materials. And they've got this website where you can find the materials, and there's forums, there's all the types of things where you can also share your own material. You might find audio resources as well as other things. And not only is the material available online, but a lot of it is produced in printed form, because obviously people don't necessarily always have the access to those resources, so you can distribute those materials in other ways, in other forms, to get out to people. But the characteristics of TESA as a particular project which has been going for some time now, it developed on the back of research and development activities through the 1990s, and then about 8 years ago it started on this new phase of sort of developing material. It's also had support from a number of different bodies, including the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. But they were looking at defined purpose and need, teacher education. It's the fact that in much of Africa, there's the whole Millennium Development Goal process of education for all, primary education for all, but even if there is a school in a village, in a remote area, and there is a teacher, you might find the teacher has not done any more schooling than they did in that school when they were younger. They have not been trained as a teacher. They just happen to be older and they've been through it. Obviously, attendance at some of those schools, the whole pedagogy, the whole didactics of being a teacher is just not present. They don't have the support and resources. TESA is about the local design of intervention using open educational resources. It's producing sets of resources which are about teacher education, so it's aiming at all those teachers and particularly remote teachers in many ways. Think about the modes of working they have and structuring the OER in such a way that it is usable by those teachers, but it's also usable by the different members of the consortium for them to use in different ways. The teacher education that happens in the different member countries, consortia, is quite different. As I'm going to show, so estimated 4 million additional teachers to meet the Education for All goals, substantial proportion underqualified or unqualified, concerns over the quality, limited capacity, poor working and learning conditions, multitude of languages, issues of status, morale, and HIV/AIDS. Teacher education is important. Actually, it's the same in health education. It's the same in lots of bits of education in Africa. The need is high, but the sort of demand is difficult to provide. So it's producing those materials and also recognising this is, again, relevant to the most dominant language for whatever country they're in. So it's not only in English, it's in French and Kiswahili and Arabic, and there are further translations. Of course, as open education resources, if another country wishes to take them, translate them into another language, they can do so. So some examples of TESA in use. You can see that they produce these core set of materials about teacher education to a set template which is provide the core. They're translated directly, so they're different language versions, but then any member or anybody else is free to take any of those and adapt them further, add to them, produce them in different form. So in the case of Nigeria, the National Teachers Institute had an in-service program, a National Nigeria Certificate in Education. They've had, whenever this was produced, 102,000 students study those materials based on that as part of that certificate. In Uganda, Kayambogo University, they produced in a diploma in education for primary external, and is a distance program. You can keep going. Open University of Tanzania, Open University of Sudan, Kigali Institute of Education. They're all doing things. They're taking the same as common sets of resources, but then saying our need and our way we want to do it, and the way we want to teach, the way we want to reach out to those teachers is this. But the collaboration on that materials has provided the resources, and the collaboration has also helped them, all the participating institutions, to understand better something about the teacher education and pedagogy and the role of educational resources, again, in educational programs. And there's research being done on this, but there's evidence of improved teaching practices, more reflective thinking after lessons, teacher and pupil enjoyment, the flexibility for doing this, and you get lots and lots of feedback like this. You could have pages and pages and pages of feedback from some of these teachers saying, well, it's just wonderful, I couldn't do what I was doing without these types of resources. It's very important. And the model of intervention, the starting point is the classroom, is thinking, who's the target for this? So this is OERs for a particular purpose, a particular need, target audience, produced for that, practical, activity-based, valuing the school practitioner, but remembering that implementation is dispersed and decentralised. It's not just one size fits all, there's different modes of doing it. Alignment with the local practices and the local autonomy from the different TESA coordinators. And as I said, the resources are highly structured and they're contextualised to reflect the environment of the teacher and things like that. So again, this is a particular intervention, and that's a sort of model of the creation and adaptation, the type of cycles and things that you need to sort of go through in terms of the initial creation and quality assurance, editing and testing, and then there's the localization and the local quality assurance and testing and things like this. So very robust. It's getting up to hundreds of thousands of teachers. It's the type of model it's being replicated now in other areas like health education and training in Africa. It's also being looked at in terms of other subjects of this type of approach and types of things. And this was, here's some of the organisations involved in that. And last year, this Tessa was the winner of a Queen's Anniversary Prize Award for this work. So, lots of activity. What is the impact? I've shown some of the impact, the stories from stakeholders. I mean, some of that feedback, the things you get from the participants, the people who are using these materials are invaluable. Surveys of users, I'll give some indication of that. You'll see more in the Open Learning Research Report and elsewhere of some of the work we've done, but you'll also find it on MIT Open Courseware site, or if not there, go to the blog for Steve Carson, who's is currently the president of the Open Courseware Consortium, but is also heavily involved in the MIT Open Courseware. You can observe behaviours. You can look at web traffic through analytics. But I come back to what I was talking about this morning. The evidence of viability or sustainability of all this activity is about the actual and perceived strategic value to the organisation or organisations involved, and also thinking about new business models. This might seem all nice and exciting, but unless it really sort of meets a particular need and people see the value of it, they want to sustain it. I mean, I think Tessa will be sustained when there is no longer sort of donor funding to do that, because now there's a consortium of people who recognise the benefits of doing stuff together, and they will work together in different ways and continue to work so and find the ways to do so, even if it's not as quite scale that Tessa has been before, or it might be in smaller groups. In terms of research and evaluation here at the U, we are the host, along with the Carnegie Mellon University in the States, for OLNet, Open Learning Network. This is specifically to research, and it's trying to create a network of researchers and people involved in OER projects who can contribute evidence. But the work of OLNet is to try to collate and synthesise and sift through whole sets of activities and material that is happening around the world and try to make sense of it and see, does OER actually help people? How does it help people? What are the lessons to be learned to try and draw up those best practices? And it's trying to do this through mechanisms of action research, but also what's called collective intelligence, of trying to get people, anybody, to try and provide data and information, however small. It goes back to that idea of iSpot, of all these, lots of individual people can make what might be seemingly to them just a sort of more trivial observation or little case study, or say, well, we did this and this, that. They might not think much of it, but if there's a lot of people do that, you can start seeing patterns, and you're seeing patterns of use and reuse, people doing the same thing, and you can say, oh, that's interesting. We need to look at that more closely and follow it up. And so there are many things on the OLNet website. You can find out about that, and it features there another project that we're involved here at the OU called Pocket, a JISC-funded project in doing that. But equally, as well as all those people doing that, I say there's the site statistics. Here's one I took off a few weeks ago from MIT Open Courseware, and it tells you, they publish on their site where people come from, things like that. You can see that it's obviously dominated by North America, but you get a lot. Look at that, China. And that's through the translations and sort of coming up. It obviously is very low in many parts of the world, in sub-Saharan Africa here, but often that's because people can't access the site as well because they don't have that connectivity. But again, there's a lot of material on there. As part of the UK OER project, there's a synthesis and evaluation, research and evaluation element to it. So if you go to the GIST site, you can get to this. There's a wiki where they reviewed all the projects and activities of within the UK OER phase 1. They'll be doing that for UKOR 2. Again, it's trying to draw lessons and information from this whole range of projects. So it's not just what this institution did over here, what this institution did there. It's trying to sift through the work and activities and evidence from whole sets of projects and activities to see what are the common themes, what works, what doesn't work, what are the common issues, to draw out both some of these principles in terms of how things might help conceptualise how we do teaching and learning, but more often than not, much more on the practical basis about what works, what can we actually employ, what have people employed, what have they done, what they found that students like, what they found that learners like, what they found that teachers liked. These are the things we need to do. I talked about UNESCO, they're on their wiki as things, they got stories from different people. Here's the one we put in about ourselves. I don't think it's been updated for a couple of years, so probably need to sort of get it updated. But again, there's a lot of stuff out there in various ways which you can find out in increasing numbers of publications. Open Learning Research Report, available on the Knowledge Network or the Open Research Online, but you can get your free printed copy there and things. And so there's many aspects and issues. I've seen that slide from this morning. But there's an increasing body of publications and evidence of what is and what isn't working. So another message you can take home is you're not alone. If you think you're getting into this, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do this in my institution, you're not alone, that there's plenty of people out there willing to help. And of course, here at school, we're trying to provide some help as well. And of course, there's these many possible approaches for gathering the information, the evidence of what is working. And it's not, any one individual project doesn't generate much of this, but by trying to collate it across many of them, it starts to be more powerful, because you can say that this is not just happening in one area, it's happening across many institutions. And we need to think about this in terms of social institutional context, about the learner, the educator and the researcher. And as researchers, we certainly, and this gets talked about in the report, we looked at mixing the methods in terms of monitoring, surveying, everyone contributing. We videoed people in user labs. We got people to keep logs and notes of what they were doing. We surveyed them. We interviewed them over the phone. We asked people to send in their stories. There's no single way in terms of trying to provide evidence. You've got to think about all the different ways in which you might gain some type of evidence of what is working about it. I won't go into this. This is something I talked about this morning in terms of the sort of volunteer students and social learners. But there's also looking at the educators. We're looking at learners, students, educators, other organisations. We looked at ourselves, what we're doing, trying to decide how it is what we did it, and looked at all the issues about collaboration, using as is, how Open Learn through the lab space might be a route for publishing for others, sort of technical changes that we've made. We keep reflecting on and looking at the sort of technical changes we've made to the site and things, and we've dropped things and added things and dropped things and added more things, and we're looking at it all again, and we might drop lots of things again, and these types of things it's one of these things you can't stand still, this stuff. If you've got a site and you're doing these things, you've got to give it constant attention, otherwise you won't get the visitors, but it's also because you're wanting to improve it, you want to understand who are the users, who are the people using it, what do they want from it, and what do you need to adapt it and change it to make it more useful to them for whatever purposes, as long as it fits in with those, as I said, those strategic priorities of institutions. So you can use it for experimentation, staff development, collaborations and reputation. It's largely repeating a lot of these things. I've mentioned the Pocket project as an example earlier on in terms of things. This is almost like a precursor to some of the things we're doing with SCORE, where we work with Bolton, Derby and Exeter in terms of them getting some of their content into lab space of Open Learn and understanding all the things that are going on. And it was sort of almost like a precursor and informed a lot of things which went into the JISC UKOL project. Here at the OU, because there's a lot of things going on, but a lot of wider things through other projects and JISC funded projects, there's been something called CloudWorks produced, which is a site in which it's possible for people to share, find, discuss learning and teaching ideas and experiences, create clouds. I don't want to go into it too much, but it's been used as adjuncts to all sorts of meetings, conferences, seminars, but also people just put their things in their research projects. If you go into there, people will create a cloud in which they can then just put some stuff. Ideas, they might write some notes, they might just put PowerPoint presentations and things about a particular area. Then you can create a cloudscape, and you can put clouds in that cloudscape by sort of tagging them as being in that cloudscape, so you can bring some of them together. And so by tagging, you can find all sorts of things. So if you go in there and search on open educational resources, you'll probably get a list of about 60 clouds in which there's all sorts of things going on there, and read about things that are happening. Something that might have been an event that happened 18 months ago, but you might read through the reporting of it, the sort of blogs, postings that are put in, the Twitter feed, and say, oh, that's interesting. I see they talked about that then. And you say, oh, I'd like to contact them and talk about what they did. So again, it's a way of bringing things together. Here's some of those cloudscapes and open education resources. It was used for the Open Courseware Consortium Global Meeting 2009. There's a online deliberation emerging tools 2010. There's 17 clouds in that. There's something on OER and sustainability. There are 7 clouds that. So again, this is just another one of these ways in terms of having a technology to try and bring things together. We're nearly there. Last leg. Business models and sustainability. Just to leave you with this issue, because it started off the day with the issue of sustainability, and it's always important, how do you keep these things going? Aligning it to institutional strategies and mission is important. But you do have to think about there are these transitional phases in terms of moving from a project, in terms of mainstreaming or embedding within existing business model practices and processes. So that's what I talked about. It's think about how does open educational resources help with student support? Does it help perhaps disabled students? You just have to start thinking out of the box. Is there a particularity about open education resources which you can say, well, we already do this with our students. Could we do it better through open educational resources? Or we need to do some language teaching for them. Oh, could we organise the language teaching, which is perhaps outside of the sort of main course programme or qualification programme? So, perhaps we should use open educational resources and use that. Again, it's just thinking about how you do things and structure them in a different way. But equally, just as many different companies are doing, you can look at saying, well, we're making some of this stuff available free. What are the additional services that people might pay for on the back of that free stuff? I mentioned this morning about publishers who might make a chapter of something free. People get there, oh, that's interesting. And they're hooked and say, I want to buy the book. Okay, so they buy the book. It's what's called the freemium model. I'll say a bit more about that. You might get donations from supporters, grants from funding bodies, and the free labour of volunteers. I've talked about all these ways in which you get the effort and put in there. And even Wikipedia needs to get donations. Annual appeal, just had. Although they're a small organisation in terms of the paid staff, they still need about $20 million a year to be able to run, so they still have to make an annual call out, and they're very successful at doing that. Just saying, if you want to obviously get money from foundations and to build relationships with donors, where there's a nice open learn study unit to find out how you might want to go about doing that and approaching foundations and others to give you money. And it comes from a course on winning resources and support. But it's the type of thing you have to think about. There might be particular activities you want to do where you're looking after those. Here's a case of the sort of freemium model. I mentioned Flat Word Knowledge. This outfit is an educational publisher, textbook publisher, just like any other textbook publisher in the US, finds top faculty to produce these things, and the online book is free. But there's lots of other stuff. If you want it, you have to pay for. But I also talked about how very private commercial outfits like Kaplan University, which is very much a private body, are also making some of their material free because they see that, again, it's good about reputation, advertisement, things And you have to remember, even if you're a publicly funded university in one country, if you start doing something in another country, you're actually a private university because you're not getting any public grant. So there's a blurring between public and private things. A good place to find out about a lot of these things is work done by the Strategic Content Alliance, partly funded by JISC, which has the BBC, well, it did have Bector, but it's gone now, NHS, and they've got a whole set of papers and things on business models for sustaining open access materials, open access resources, educational things across a whole set of things. There's quite a number of reports and things on their business modelling publications. Sustaining digital resources, an on-the-ground view of projects today. Again, this sort of sets out a lot of these things, a lot of the issues, which is not just for universities, it might be there for museums, libraries and archives if they start making some of their material freely available. So, to round up, nearly 6 minutes to 5, certainly the approach here at the OU, and the one I'd always advocate on the back of this, is the networking, the connections and collaborations that we have tried to use open education resources to extend the types of collaborations and connections which we already had to new people. So although at the heart of it we've got the learning space, the lab space, the new front end of Open Learn, this is Open School and Shared Solutions and AllNet as major things. Here is just a small number of the funded projects the OU is also involved in, with many other partners in terms of doing Stella, a big one, role European projects in that. ICOPA, again, wide and European. There's Tessa, there's iSpot, Pocket, Steeple. Steeple was working with, particularly did a lot of work around podcasting technology, and was that a lot of the work that was done under Steeple was a good reason why we both in Oxford and Cambridge, particularly Oxford with their Open Spires, were able to take advantage of approaches from iTunes U to go into iTunes U, because we already had an understanding of the technologies and things to do that, and so did Oxford in terms of their Open Spires type stuff. And this is just a small number of those projects. 5 minutes for questions.
Sorry, come back.
On the Tessa project, when you're in sub-Saharan Africa, what was the connectivity like, and did you have to change the content in order for it to be accessible?
Well, again, there's multiple approaches to that. The core is there is a website with the resources there that were developed by the consortium partners. Now, consortium partners were then free to do and convert the materials in whatever format they wanted. Many of them in those types of uses actually took it, they might download it or take it away from somewhere they got the connectivity on a DVD or whatever, and then they produce a print version. They might modify it and produce a book. So a lot of the materials delivered to teachers, the teachers in those classrooms in remote areas, they get it as a paper version. You know, and it's, like I mentioned this morning because it's also trying to get away that OER is not just digital resources, and it's not just all about through the internet and maybe where you get them. In terms of their purpose, their need, then you might be providing them in all sorts of different ways. You might still be doing it in a classroom. You might want to do it in paper. You might be wanting to provide it on a DVD. I mean, another way of doing that is burn this stuff onto a DVD and post it around. So somebody might have a computer, but they don't have broadband connections at all, but they can still load it onto a computer if they've got the electricity to support it and things like that. But if you've got a paper form as well, then you don't have to worry about the electricity unless you need a light to read at night or whatever. You know, so again, it's about thinking about where the users are. Now, obviously for starting off with a lot of open education resources, you just publish them and think they're out there for the great big wide world. But it really pays to think about who do you think will be the major audiences for it. Is it internally? Is it your students? Do you want to be your students, your university, to be the main? Right. But as is been shown with many of the institutional repositories so far, much more of the activity comes from outside, not from the students, from other people. So if that's the case, who is it? Is it individuals, or is it some of these companies or organisations or other people they might want to collaborate and work with? So a lot of this is thinking about what do you think the consequences of what we're doing? Who is it out there? This is not just vanity publishing. You know, if you think this is about vanity publishing about out there, then it's not going to survive. Nobody's going to come do it. It's about thinking of we're publishing for a purpose. We want to learn from that. We constantly give it attention. We think about what the content is, trying to gauge what the feedback, what the users are saying about it, what they want, and try and adjust accordingly if it meets and supports the sort of mission of the organisation or organisations that are involved.
With all this activity, is there any accredited courses, any of these that are moving towards sort of free qualification at the end of it? Because a lot of it just seems to be resources or the open courseware where you do the course but you don't really actually, you learn and you get the experience. Or
It's beginning to happen. There are people looking at that, which is, so far a lot of things have been sort of self-certification, or you might work through like a peer-to-peer university and you complete and you might get a certificate, but it obviously doesn't in itself hold direct academic credit because it's not coming from a recognised and quality-assured institution. So it's that thing. Universities have been looking about this transition of having the assessment only, or sort of like that's what in the US is called sort of challenge exam, whereby you just have the sort of examinations. And you have the syllabus posted and things. It's a bit like the University of London external programme, which started nearly over 150 years ago, was like that. There's a published syllabus and there are exams. And you just had to find out ways of learning what you needed to know about the syllabus to try and take the exam. So you just paid to the exam. So there are some institutions doing that. The Open University in the Netherlands had experiments on their OpenER site where they had the possibility for some of their courses for people to take an exam and pay €30 to sit the exam. If they passed, of course, they got academic credit. So there are a few examples, and there are more trying to look at that as the way of, can you have, well, there's the material out there and people can study as they want. Can you have a sort of assessment-only systems whereby it's able to do that and get academic credit, which they can then take into their studies? Of course, there is possibilities, and it does happen here at the OU. We've got some assessment of prior experiential learning or prior certificated learning courses, the empty box courses, where people put together a portfolio of evidence of what they've learned and present that, and that gets assessed. Study of open education resources, if properly evidenced and shown what you've learned from it, can be part of that portfolio. So there are those mechanisms. They are beginning to be looked at, but the whole scope of the sort of assessment-only provision is still in its infancy. I mean, there are, taking just outside open education resources, there's the outfit called the Western Governors Union in the States, where they do a lot of they give credit or give awards and qualifications in vocational areas. It's about competency-based assessment. And again, generally they don't run courses. Western Governors Universities don't run courses. They don't run anything. All they do is assess and validate what people have learned. And they have exams and people sign up for them, they do that, or they might have the tests, they might have to come in and demonstrate something. If they do that, they get the credit. So those types of models are there. Of course, it's quite a different way of doing it, and in terms of bridging this between the informal and the formal. But it's certainly being looked at.
Thanks.
Well, it's just after 5. Thank you all for giving this your attention, and it's been a long day. Could I ask you, please, some of you have done it already, wonderful, just to fill in your feedback forms, please, and leave them on the table at the back near Guy. That would be really excellent. Very helpful for organising future events to have your thoughts on this one. Thank you, and thank you very much, Andy.